We are the Ultramarines, the sons of Gilliman. We stand. We fight. We prevail.
Space Marine 2 has been out for a little while now, and the world is either finding out about the Warhammer universe for the first time, or they're gripping their hands around a sequel that they've been waiting for 13 years. But if you wanted more Warhammer, and you actually want to be a Space Marine, well then Zero Latency have got you covered with their latest release, Space Marine VR Defenders of Avarax. Now, this video won't be a traditional video review, if that sort of makes sense, as Space Marine VR is only available at Zero Latency venues, so it's not a game that you can purchase on your Xbox or your PC. However, Zero Latency is available globally in physical locations, so there is some availability.
That's good.
If you've not been to a Zero Latency venue before, you're given a headset, a VR gun, a quick intro on how the weapons work, and then you walk into a giant empty shoebox styled room, and there are a variety of games to play with some zombies, a bit of Far Cry, and the new release Space Marine Defenders of Avarax. But well, what can you expect from playing Space Marine in VR? Well, you and your mates are given a heavy bolt rifle and you're sent off to go to the planet of Avarax that's currently under a Tyranid invasion, and oh my god, there's a fair amount of Tyranids to face off against. You'll start off in this little introduction area, getting used to the weapons, learning how to reload, use the undermounted grenade launcher, how to check your score, as there is a score system in Space Marine VR, as well as just take in the atmosphere of being a Space Marine and checking out each of your squad mates too, which is kind of cool. In my first session, there was a player in our team who was a little bit shorter than the rest of us, and we were all Primaris Marines, and she was actually a firstborn. It was a really cool little attention to detail moment. But you'll arrive on the planet of Avarax, you'll see some Imperial Guards who are tiny in comparison to the Primaris Space Marines that you play as, and you make your way through about, say, a half hour, 40-minute or so mission where you face off against the hordes of the Hormagaunts. There are Tyranid warriors, gargoyles, and you even face off against a Hive Tyrant as well. Now, thank you to Zero Latency, because I got to play Space Marine VR twice. My first session was in a squad of 8, basically like a Primaris Space Marine squad, and my second session was in a fire team, if you will, with 4 Primaris Marines, and we got some pretty cool things as well, but we also noticed that the game works a little bit differently depending on how many players you have. The general overall story is pretty straightforward. Your squad of Ultramarines are sent to the planet of Avarax to extract an artifact, but the planet is under siege from a Tyranid invasion, so you need to drop onto the planet, get the artifact, and extract.
It's pretty standard, really.
But, as I mentioned, the enemy faction that you face off against are the Leviathan Fleet Tyranids, where you'll start off by defending against swarms of Hormagaunts, who will rush you over barriers and jump out of holes in the wall, and a surprise swarm as well can just jump out and get you from behind while you're facing off against larger enemies, like, say, the Hive Tyrant or the Warriors. Now, the Hormagaunts will go down pretty quickly enough from a round or two from your bolter, but you do need to actively sort of keep your eyes open and communicate with your team, as being a VR game, you need to watch out for things from behind you. But as you progress, you'll take some elevators and some tram rides, and you'll find yourself being attacked by the Tyranid gargoyles, which are just chaotic, random fun, if you will, because you're trying to shoot above you and they're just moving so quick, you can't really hit much. And the thing to note as well is, the gargoyles in this sort of game mode, or this sort of VR experience, but the gargoyles are the only enemy variant that deal range damage, so you kind of need to pay attention to them and just start spraying into the air.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bah! Bah! Well, I don't see so good, so I missed.
Further on into the mission, if you will, the warriors act as mini-bosses, and you find yourself just sort of focusing fire as a team on them, perhaps while a member or two from your squad is just taking out the general hordes of Hormagaunts coming your way. And the warriors do deal a fair bit of damage if they get close, but they've only got those close range blades. They're not like the warriors in Space Marine 2 that have sort of the cannons, if you will. But finally, as you get towards the end of the mission, you face off against a Hive Tyrant, which, just like in Space Marine 2, acts like a proper boss fight with a health bar. Now, it'll be equipped with its sword and its whip, and the Hive Tyrant will charge players and do some area of effect style of damage if you get too close, and it deals a load of damage. And the chaotic nature of facing off against a Hive Tyrant with Hormagaunts rushing towards you is pretty damn chaotic, and once you finish off the Hive Tyrant, you will then extract the planet. Mission's over, and then you realise that you've been running around a room for half an hour and you're covered in sweat.
Why are you so sweaty?
I was watching Cops.
But this was also my first experience in a VR game like this. Now, yeah, I've done Formula 1 VR and other titles where I can just sit in my nerd room, but actually running around, having to constantly look behind myself, I was thoroughly impressed with how Space Marine Defenders of Avarax ran. The world of Avarax looks great. There are dark tunnels and platforms that you find yourself on that are pretty cool, and especially seeing swarms of Hormagaunts just run on top of pipes and leap at you, the atmosphere alone worked great. What really got me though were the special weapon pickups. Now, as you start Space Marine VR, you have a heavy bolt rifle. It's got unlimited ammo, it just needs to reload after every 30 rounds, but you can find drop pods with additional weapon pickups, like a flamethrower, the plasma gun, the melter gun, or the heavy bolter, all of which sort of have specific playstyles. The flamer will have you act like, say, a salamander, running into combat, scorching anything you can, or at least that's what I was doing, where the heavy bolter had me sitting back and providing mass cover fire. Now, the plasma gun can be charged up for larger shots, deal more damage to an effective area, or you can rapid fire it if you want to, and the melter gun works like the way it does in Space Marine 2, acting a bit like, say, a shotgun. And each of these weapons though have a limited use. Once you've emptied the weapon, you basically drop the special weapon and you go back to your bolter. But I think the way that Zero Latency really sells this game, or why you should take a look at Space Marine VR, is playing this with friends, whether that's with 8 players or 4 players. In my first playthrough session with my mate Des, he saw me run off around a corner to go get a flamethrower, and I disappeared because I ran around a corner. Or for then to just see him see fire shooting out of the walls and hear me say, "I'm a fucking salamander, baby." Or in my separate session with 4 players with my mates Metlink, Nausea and Dantix, we were all laughing because we were getting attacked by gargoyles. However, we had flamethrowers and the flamethrowers actually couldn't reach the gargoyles. But points of the story have you as well split up and separate from your team. So in my 8-player session, you split up into 2 teams of 4, where you provide cover and overwatch for some players, while the others are stuck on the other side of a wall. And it kind of reminds me of the original Gears of War games, where you separate from your squad, but you can still see and assist them, and the antics of hearing the other squad run into Tyranids while you're shooting gargoyles on a tram is pretty damn funny. But for me, by far though, the nerdiest moment, at least in my first session, was where other reviewers were acting like, say, Marines from Aliens or Halo, while me and my mate Des were constantly making Warhammer references, yelling charge and cleanse the Xenos. But by far the nerdiest, yes, but the coolest moment for me is when in the first session when all 8 players saw the Hive Tyrant for the first time. We were all a bit stunned because it is sort of big and large, and I yelled at the top of my lungs for the Emperor and just started opening fire, and everyone else in this session just started shooting and yelling for the Emperor, and it was a really cool moment. But as you can tell, I love Space Marine VR. I got to chat to the devs about making Space Marine VR and the limitations of what they could and what they couldn't do for the game, and the attention to detail in this world is really damn impressive. However, there are some small things that I had issues with personally here and there. Firstly, you are stuck as playing as an Ultramarine, and while each player has different identifying features like bionic arms, or if someone's a bit smaller in your crew, they play as a Firstborn rather than a Primaris, which I thought was really cool. I think it could have been awesome if you got to choose your own faction. Like if I could play as the Black Templars or the Salamanders, it would make me easily identifiable by the rest of my team because I'm the Black Space Marine or I'm the Green Space Marine running around on the field. Also, while you're playing Space Marine VR at Zero Latency venues, you might have different setups or physical issues on site. Now, during my first session, there were no issues or problems at all, though an 8-player game can get a little crowded sometimes, and you will sort of break immersion if you get too close to other players or walls, because barriers and warnings will come up on your headset. But for my second playthrough with my mate Dantix, he couldn't use the undermounted grenade launcher feature at all, so he couldn't take out a swarm of Tyranids as easily as I could. Dantix also had an issue with his headset where he could only see a couple of meters in front of him and then the rest of it was just blurry. And I found I actually couldn't use the manual reload button on my gun as well because the physical button had broken on the gun. Having said that though, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Space Marine VR. Since I was a kid playing on the tabletop and playing Dawn of War in the original Space Marine game, I've always wondered what it would be like to be a Space Marine, and Space Marine Defenders of Avarax have answered that question, and now I want more.
I want more.
and I know I shouldn't.
I would love to see Zero Latency do more with the Warhammer license, a Imperial Guard style of game where we face off against the horrors of chaos, and it would make a really cool horror game. A Tower Fire Warrior shooter where aiming and precision is required. Shit, a Horus Heresy game would be brilliant, where you can play as either the Loyalists or the Traitor Legion, and you have to sort of take place in a key battle in the timeline. Hell, even just the dark tunnels and pipe areas of Space Marine VR had me think Zero Latency alien shooter with pulse rifles and motion trackers. That could be really, really cool. But if you're interested, you can check out Space Marine VR Defenders of Avarax at your nearest Zero Latency venue. But whether you want to purge the Xenos from the galaxy or you find yourself siding with Horus, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.